Weimar Republic, German, Weimarer Republik Republik, listen, is an unofficial historical designation for the German state between 1919 and 1933. The name derives from the city of Weimar, where its constitutional assembly first took place. The official name of the state was still Deutsches Reich. It remained unchanged since 1871. The republic was a semi-presidential representative democracy, which emerged in the aftermath of the German Revolution of 1918-19. A national assembly was convened in Weimar, where a new constitution for the Deutsches Reich was written, and adopted on August 11, 1919. In its 14 years, the Weimar Republic faced numerous problems, including hyperinflation, political extremism, with paramilitaries, both left and right-wing, and contentious relationships with the victors of the First World War. The people of Germany blamed the Weimar Republic rather than their wartime leaders for the country's defeat and for the humiliating terms of the Treaty of Versailles. However, the Weimar Republic government successfully reformed the currency, unified tax policies, and organized the railway system. Weimar Germany eliminated most of the requirements of the Treaty of Versailles. It never completely met its disarmament requirements, and eventually paid only a small portion of the war reparations, by twice restructuring its debt through the Dawes Plan and the Young Plan. 5 Under the Locarno Treaties, Germany accepted the western borders of the Republic, but continued to dispute the eastern border. From 1930 onwards President Hindenburg used emergency powers to back Chancellors Heinrich Brüning, Franz von Papen and General Kurt von Schleicher. The Great Depression, exacerbated by Brüning's policy of deflation, led to a surge in unemployment. In 1933, Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor, with the Nazi Party being part of a coalition government. The Nazis held 2 out of the remaining 10 cabinet seats. Von Papen as Vice-Chancellor was intended to be the Eminenzgreis who would keep Hitler under control, using his close personal connection to Hindenburg. Within months the Reichstag Fire Decree and the Enabling Act of 1933 had brought about a state of emergency. It wiped out constitutional governance and civil liberties. Hitler's seizure of power, Machtergreifung, was permissive of government by decree without legislative participation. These events brought the Republic to an end, as democracy collapsed, a single-party state-founded Nazi era. Even so, German Foreign Office official Harry Graf Kessler had predicted as early as February 1919 that the Republic was doomed. "The paradox," he wrote, "by which a social democratic government allows itself and the capitalist cash boxes to be defended by royalist officers and unemployed on the dole is altogether too crazy." 7 His friend and Socialist Liberal Democrat Party colleague Walter Rathenau was assassinated, just like Matthias Ertberger before him, by right-wing assassin squad's organization Consul. Like the Nazis, the Consul was founded by the Freikorps. Opting for a military solution, the Republic in Germany was destroyed by gangsterism, infighting, incompetence, political naivete, and international debt obligations. Contents Hide. 1. Name. 2. Flag and coat of arms. 3. Armed forces. 4. History. 4.1. November Revolution, 1918, 1919. 4.2. Years of Crisis, 1919, 1923. 4.2.1. Burden from the First World War. 4.2.1.1. Treaty of Versailles. 4.2.1.2. Allied Rhineland occupation. 4.2.1.3. Reparations. 4.2.1.4. Hyperinflation. 4.2.2. Political turmoil. 4.3. Golden Era, 1924, 1929. 4.4. Social policy under Weimar. 4.5. Decline, 1930, 1933. 4.5.1. Onset of the Great Depression. 4.5.2. Bruning's policy of deflation, 1930, 1932. 4.5.3. The Papen Deal. 4.5.4. Elections of July 1932. 4.5.5. Schleicher Cabinet. 4.6. End. 4.6.1. Hitler's Chancellorship, 1933. 4.6.2. Hitler Cabinet meeting in mid-March. 4.6.3. Enabling Act negotiations. 4.6.4. Passage of the Enabling Act. 4.6.5. Consequences. 5. Aftermath. 6. Reasons for failure. 6.1. Economic problems. 6.2. Institutional problems. 6.3. Role of individuals. 7. Constituent states. 8. See also. 9. References. 10. Further reading. 10.1. Historiography. 11. External links. Name edit. The Weimar Republic is so called because the assembly that adopted its constitution met at Weimar, Germany from February 6, 1919 to 11 August 1919, but this name only became mainstream after 1933. Between 1919 and 1933 there was no single name for the new state that gained widespread acceptance, which is precisely why the old name Deutsches Reich continued in existence even though hardly anyone used it during the Weimar period. 9. To the right of the spectrum, the politically engaged rejected the new democratic model and cringed to see the honor of the traditional word Reich associated with it. 10. The Catholic Center Party, Zentrum, favored the term Deutscher Volksstaat, German People's State, while on the moderate left the Chancellor's SPD preferred Deutsche Republik, German Republic. 10. By 1925 Deutsche Republik was used by most Germans, but for the anti-democratic right the word Republic was, along with the relocation of the seat of power to Weimar, a painful reminder of a government structure that had been imposed by foreign statesmen, along with the expulsion of Kaiser Wilhelm in the wake of massive national humiliation. 10. The first recorded mention of the term Republik von Weimar, Republic of Weimar, came during a speech delivered by Adolf Hitler at a National Socialist German Workers' Party rally in Munich on February 24, 1929. It was a few weeks later that the term Weimar Republic was first used, again by Hitler, in a newspaper article. 9. Only during the 1930s did the term of expression become mainstream, both within and outside Germany. Flag and Coat of Arms edit. The official coat of arms of Germany, Reichswappen, from 1919 to 1928. This section may be confusing or unclear to readers. In particular, which exact form of flag and coat were introduced by which entity? Please help us clarify the section. Suggestions may be found on the talk page. February 2016, learn how and when to remove this template message. After the introduction of the Republic, the flag and coat of arms of Germany were altered to reflect the political changes. The Republican tricolor is based on the flag that the Paulskirche Constitution of 1849 introduced, which was decided upon by the German National Assembly in Frankfurt am Main, at the peak of the German civic movement that demanded parliamentary participation and unification of the German states. The achievements and signs of this movement were mostly done away with after its downfall and the political reaction. Only the tiny German Principality of Waldeck-Pyrmont upheld the tradition and continued to use the German colors called Schwarz-Rot-Gold in German, English, black-red-gold. These signs had remained symbols of the Paulskirche movement. Weimar wanted to express its origins in that political movement between 1849 and 1858, while anti-republicans opposed this flag. The first German Confederal Navy, Reichsflotte, 1848-1852, had proudly deployed a naval ensign based on Schwarz-Rot-Gold. The Weimar Republic Navy, or Reichsmarine, 1918, 1933, insisted on using the pre-1918 colors of the previous Kaiser-like Marine, 1871, 1918, which were black-white-red, as did the German Merchant Marine. The Republicans took up the idea of the German coat of arms established by the Paulskirche movement, using the same charge animal, an eagle, in the same colors, black, red, and gold, but modernizing its form, including a reduction of the heads from 2 to 1. Friedrich Ebert initially declared the official German coat of arms to be a design by Emil Doepler, shown in the info box above, as of November 12, 1919, following a decision of the German government 11. In 1928, however, the Reichswappen, Reich coat of arms, designed by Tobias Schwab, 1887, 1967, in 1926 or 1924 12 replaced it as the official emblem for the German Olympic team 13-14-15. The Reichswehr adopted the new Reichswappen in 1927-15. Doepler's design then became the Reichschild, Reichsescutcheon, with restricted use such as pennant for government vehicles. In 1949 the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, adopted all three signs of Weimar Republic, Reichswappen, Reichschild, and Reichsflagge as Bundeswappen, Bundesschild and Bundesflagge 15. Armed Forces Edit. Main article, Reichswehr. Jack of the Kaiser-like Marine, 1903, 1919. Jack of the Reichsmarine, 1918, 1935. After the dissolution of the Imperial Army, the Reichswehr, in 1918, Germany's military forces consisted of irregular paramilitaries, namely the various right-wing Freikorps groups composed of veterans from the war. The Freikorps units were formally disbanded in 1920, although continued to exist in underground groups, and on January 1, 1921, a new Reichswehr, figuratively, Defense of the Realm, was created. The Treaty of Versailles limited the size of the Reichswehr to 100,000 soldiers, consisting of 7 infantry divisions and 3 cavalry divisions, 10 armored cars and a navy, the Reichsmarine, restricted to 36 ships in active service. No aircraft of any kind was allowed. The main advantage of this limitation, however, was that the Reichswehr could afford to pick the best recruits for service. However, with inefficient armor and no air support, the Reichswehr would have had limited combat abilities. Privates were mainly recruited from the countryside, as it was believed that young men from cities were prone to socialist behavior, which would fray the loyalty of the privates to their conservative officers. Although technically in service of the Republic, the army was predominantly officered by conservative reactionaries who were sympathetic to right-wing organizations. Hans von Seeckt, the head of the Reichswehr, declared that the army was not loyal to the Democratic Republic, and would only defend it if it were in their interests. During the Kapp Putsch, for example, the army refused to fire upon the rebels. However, as right-wing as the army was, it hesitated to assist the Nazis, whom they mostly viewed as thugs. Citation needed. The SA was the Reichswehr's main opponent throughout its existence, as they saw them as a threat to their existence. Dubious, discuss and the army fired at them during the Beer Hall Putsch. Upon the establishment dubious, discuss of the SS, the Reichswehr took a softer look upon the Nazis since the SS seemed more respectable, and openly favored order over anarchy. In 1935, several years after Hitler came to power, the Reichswehr was renamed the Wehrmacht. History Edit. November Revolution, 1918, 1919, edit. Main article, German Revolution of 1918, 1919. The Rebellion, November 1918. In October 1918, the constitution of the German Empire was reformed to introduce a parliamentary system similar to the British, but this soon became obsolete. Citation needed. On October 29, rebellion broke out in Kiel among sailors. There, sailors, soldiers, and workers began electing workers' and soldiers' councils, Arbeiter- und Soldatenrat, modeled after the Soviets of the Russian Revolution of 1917. The revolution spread throughout Germany, and participants seized military and civil powers in individual cities. The power takeover was achieved everywhere without loss of life. At the time, the socialist movement, which represented mostly laborers, was split among two major left-wing parties: the Independent Social Democratic Party of Germany, USPD, which called for immediate peace negotiations and favored a Soviet-style command economy, and the Social Democratic Party of Germany, SPD, also known as Majority Social Democratic Party of Germany, MSPD, which supported the war effort and favored a parliamentary system. The rebellion caused great fear in the establishment and in the middle classes because of the Soviet Russia aspirations of the councils. To centrist and conservative citizens, the country looked to be on the verge of a communist revolution. On November 7, the revolution had reached Munich, resulting in King Ludwig III of Bavaria fleeing. The MSPD decided to make use of their support at the grassroots and put themselves at the front of the movement, demanding that Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicate. When he refused, Prince Max of Baden simply announced that he had done so and frantically attempted to establish a regency under another member of the House of Hohenzollern. Gustav Niski, a self-appointed military expert in the MSPD, was sent to Kiel to prevent any further unrest and took on the task of controlling the mutinous sailors and their supporters in the Kiel barracks. The sailors and soldiers, inexperienced in matters of revolutionary combat, welcomed him as an experienced politician and allowed him to negotiate a settlement, thus defusing the initial anger of the revolutionaries in uniform. On November 9, 1918, the German Republic was proclaimed by MSPD member Philipp Schiedemann at the Reichstag building in Berlin, to the fury of Friedrich Ebert, the leader of the MSPD, who thought that the question of monarchy or republic should be answered by a national assembly. 2 hours later, a free socialist republic was proclaimed, 2 km, 1.2 mi, away, at the Berliner Stadtschloss. The proclamation was issued by Karl Liebknecht, co-leader, with Rosa Luxemburg, of the Communist Spartakusbund, Spartacist League, a group of a few hundred supporters of the Russian Revolution that had allied itself with the USPD in 1917. In a legally questionable act, Reichskanzler Prince Max of Baden transferred his powers to Friedrich Ebert, who, shattered by the monarchy's fall, reluctantly accepted. In view of the mass support for more radical reforms among the workers' councils, a coalition government called Council of the People's Deputies, Rat der Volksbeauftragten, was established, consisting of 3 MSPD and 3 USPD members. Led by Ebert for the MSPD and Hugo Haas for the USPD, it sought to act as a provisional cabinet of ministers. But the power question was unanswered. Although the new government was confirmed by the Berlin Worker and Soldier Council, it was opposed by the Spartacist League. Philipp Schiedemann addresses a crowd from a window of the Reich Chancellery, November 9, 1918. The Executive Council of the Workers' and Soldiers' Councils, a coalition that included majority socialists, independent socialists, workers, and soldiers, implemented a program of progressive social change, introducing reforms such as the 8-hour workday, the releasing of political prisoners, the abolition of press censorship, increases in workers' old age, sick, and unemployment benefits, and the bestowing upon labor the unrestricted right to organize into unions. 16. A number of other reforms were carried out in Germany during the revolutionary period. It was made harder for estates to sack workers and prevent them from leaving when they wanted to, under the Provisional Act for Agricultural Labor of November 23, 1918. The normal period of notice for management, and for most resident laborers, was set at 6 weeks. In addition, a supplementary directive of December 1918 specified that female, and child, workers were entitled to a 15-minute break if they worked between 4 and 6 hours, 30 minutes for workdays lasting 6 to 8 hours, and 1 hour for longer days. 17. A decree of the 23rd of December 1918 established committees, composed of workers' representatives in their relation to the employer, to safeguard the rights of workers. The right to bargain collectively was also established, while it was made obligatory to elect workers' committees on estates and establish conciliation committees. A decree of 3 February 1919 removed the right of employers to acquire exemption for domestic servants and agricultural workers. 18. With the Verordnung of February 3, 1919, the Ebert government reintroduced the original structure of the health insurance boards according to an 1883 law, with one-third employers and two-thirds members, i.e. workers. 19 From the 28th of June 1919, health insurance committees became elected by workers themselves. 20 The Provisional Order of January 1919 concerning agricultural labor conditions fixed 2,900 hours as a maximum per year, distributed as 8, 10, and 11 hours per day in 4 monthly periods. 21 A code of January 1919 bestowed upon land laborers the same legal rights that industrial workers enjoyed, while a bill ratified that same year obliged the states to set up agricultural settlement associations which, as noted by Volker Berghahn, were endowed with the priority right of purchase of farms beyond a specified size. 22 In addition, undemocratic public institutions were abolished, involving, as noted by one writer, the disappearance of the Prussian upper house, the former Prussian lower house that had been elected in accordance with the three-class suffrage, and the municipal councils that were also elected on the class vote. 23. On November 11, an armistice was signed at Compiègne by German representatives. It effectively ended military operations between the Allies and Germany. It amounted to German capitulation. Without any concessions by the Allies, the naval blockade would continue until complete peace terms were agreed. A rift developed between the MSPD and USPD after Ebert called upon the OL, Supreme Army Command, for troops to put down a mutiny by a leftist military unit on 23-24 December 1918, in which members of the Volksmarine Division had captured the city's garrison commander Otto Wels and occupied the Reichskanzlei where the Council of the People's Deputies was situated. The ensuing street fighting left several dead and injured on both sides. The USPD leaders were outraged by what they believed was treachery by the MSPD, which, in their view, had joined with the anti-communist military to suppress the revolution. Thus, the USPD left the Council of the People's Deputies after only 7 weeks. On December 30, the split deepened when the Communist Party of Germany, KPD, was formed out of a number of radical left-wing groups, including the left wing of the USPD and the Spartacist League group. From November 1918 to January 1919, Germany was governed by the Council of the People's Deputies, under the leadership of Ebert and Haas. The council issued a large number of decrees that radically shifted German policies. It introduced the 8-hour workday, domestic labor reform, works councils, agricultural labor reform, right of civil service associations, local municipality social welfare relief, split between Reich and states, and important national health insurance, reinstatement of demobilized workers, protection from arbitrary dismissal with appeal as a right, regulated wage agreement, and universal suffrage from 20 years of age in all types of elections local and national. Ebert called for a National Congress of Councils, Reichsrätekongress, which took place from 16 to December 20, 1918, and in which the MSPD had the majority. Thus, Ebert was able to institute elections for a provisional National Assembly that would be given the task of writing a democratic constitution for parliamentary government, marginalizing the movement that called for a socialist republic. To ensure his fledgling government maintained control over the country, Ebert made an agreement with the OL, now led by Ludendorff's successor General Wilhelm Groener. The Ebert-Groener Pact stipulated that the government would not attempt to reform the army so long as the army swore to protect the state. On the one hand, this agreement symbolized the acceptance of the new government by the military, assuaging concern among the middle classes. On the other hand, it was thought contrary to working-class interests by left-wing social democrats and communists, and was also opposed by the far right who believed democracy would make Germany weaker. The new Reichswehr armed forces, limited by the Treaty of Versailles to 100,000 army soldiers and 15,000 sailors, remained fully under the control of the German officer class, despite their nominal reorganization. In January, the Spartacist League and others in the streets of Berlin made more armed attempts to establish communism, known as the Spartacist Uprising. Those attempts were put down by paramilitary Freikorps units consisting of volunteer soldiers. Bloody street fights culminated in the beating and shooting deaths of Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht after their arrests on January 15. With the affirmation of Ebert, those responsible were not tried before a court-martial, leading to lenient sentences, which made Ebert unpopular among radical leftists. Official postcard of the National Assembly. The National Assembly elections took place on January 19, 1919. In this time, the radical left-wing parties, including the USPD and KPD, were barely able to get themselves organized, leading to a solid majority of seats for the MSPD moderate forces. To avoid the ongoing fights in Berlin, the National Assembly convened in the city of Weimar, giving the future republic its unofficial name. The Weimar Constitution created a republic under a parliamentary republic system with the Reichstag elected by proportional representation. The democratic parties obtained a solid 80% of the vote. During the debates in Weimar, fighting continued. A Soviet republic was declared in Munich, but was quickly put down by Freikorps and remnants of the regular army. The fall of the Munich Soviet Republic to these units, many of which were situated on the extreme right, resulted in the growth of far-right movements and organizations in Bavaria, including Organisation Konsul, the Nazi Party, and societies of exiled Russian monarchists. Sporadic fighting continued to flare up around the country. In eastern provinces, forces loyal to Germany's fallen monarchy fought the Republic, while militias of Polish nationalists fought for independence. Great Poland uprising in Province Posen and 3 Silesian uprisings in Upper Silesia. Germany lost the war because the country ran out of allies and its economic resources were running out. Support among the population began to crumble in 1916, and by mid-1918 there was support for the war only among the die-hard monarchists and conservatives. The decisive blow came with the entry of the United States into the conflict, which made its vast industrial resources available to the beleaguered Allies. By late summer 1918 the German reserves were exhausted while fresh American troops arrived in France at the rate of 10,000 a day. Retreat and defeat were at hand, and the army told the Kaiser to abdicate, for it could no longer support him. Although in retreat, the German armies were still on French and Belgian territory when the war ended on November 11. Ludendorff and Hindenburg soon proclaimed that it was the defeatism of the civilian population that had made defeat inevitable. The die-hard nationalists then blamed the civilians for betraying the army and the surrender. This was the stab-in-the-back myth that was unceasingly propagated by the right in the 1920s and ensured that many monarchists and conservatives would refuse to support the government of what they called the November criminals. 24 Need quotation to verify 25. Years of Crisis, 1919, 1923, edit. Burden from the First World War, edit. Treaty of Versailles, edit. This section does not cite any sources. Please help improve this section by adding citations to reliable sources. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. October 2011, learn how and when to remove this template message. Germany after Versailles. Administered by the League of Nations. Annexed or transferred to neighboring countries by the treaty, or later via plebiscite and League of Nation action. Weimar, Germany. Main article, Treaty of Versailles. The growing post-war economic crisis was a result of lost pre-war industrial exports, the loss of supplies in raw materials and foodstuffs due to the continental blocus, and the loss of the colonies, along with worsening debt balances, but above all, the result of an exorbitant issue of promissory notes raising money to pay for the war. Military-industrial activity had almost ceased, although controlled demobilization kept unemployment at around 1 million. In part, the economic losses can also be attributed to the Allied blockade of Germany until the Treaty of Versailles. The Allies permitted only low import levels of goods that most Germans could not afford. Citation needed. After 4 years of war and famine, many German workers were exhausted, physically impaired, and discouraged. Millions were disenchanted with capitalism and hoping for a new era. Meanwhile, the currency depreciated. The currency would continue to depreciate following the French invasion of the Ruhr. Citation needed. The German peace delegation in France signed the Treaty of Versailles, accepting mass reductions of the German military, the prospect of substantial war reparations payments to the victorious Allies, and the controversial war guilt clause. Explaining the rise of extreme nationalist movements in Germany shortly after the war, British historian Ian Kershaw points to the national disgrace that was felt throughout Germany at the humiliating terms imposed by the victorious Allies and reflected in the Versailles Treaty, with its confiscation of territory on the eastern border and even more so its guilt clause. 26 Adolf Hitler repeatedly blamed the Republic and its democracy for accepting the oppressive terms of this treaty. The Republic's first Reichspräsident, Reich President, Friedrich Ebert of the SPD, signed the new German constitution into law on August 11, 1919. The new post-World War I Germany, stripped of all colonies, became 13.3% smaller in its European territory than its imperial predecessor. Of these losses, a large proportion consisted of provinces that were originally Polish, and Alsace-Lorraine, seized by Germany in 1870, where Germans constituted only part or a minority of local populations despite nationalist outrage at the fragmentation of Germany. Allied Rhineland occupation edit. Main article, Occupation of the Rhineland. The occupation of the Rhineland took place following the armistice with Germany of November 11, 1918. The occupying armies consisted of American, Belgian, British and French forces. In 1920, under massive French pressure, the Saar was separated from the Rhine province and administered by the League of Nations until a plebiscite in 1935, when the region was returned to the Deutsches Reich. At the same time, in 1920, the districts of Eupen and Malmedy were transferred to Belgium, see German-speaking Community of Belgium. Shortly after, France completely occupied the Rhineland, strictly controlling all important industrial areas. Reparations edit. The actual amount of reparations that Germany was obliged to pay out was not the 132 billion marks decided in the London Schedule of 1921 but rather the 50 billion marks stipulated in the A and B bonds. Historian Sally Marks says the 112 billion marks in C bonds were entirely chimerical, a device to fool the public into thinking Germany would pay much more. The actual total payout from 1920 to 1931, when payments were suspended indefinitely, was 20 billion German gold marks, worth about $5 billion US dollars or £1 billion British pounds. 12.5 billion was cash that came mostly from loans from New York bankers. The rest was goods like coal and chemicals, or from assets like railway equipment. The reparations bill was fixed in 1921 on the basis of a German capacity to pay, not on the basis of Allied claims. The highly publicized rhetoric of 1919 about paying for all the damages and all the veterans' benefits was irrelevant for the total, but it did determine how the recipients spent their share. Germany owed reparations chiefly to France, Britain, Italy, and Belgium. The U.S. Treasury received $100 million. 27. Hyperinflation edit. Further information, hyperinflation in the Weimar Republic. In the early post-war years, inflation was growing at an alarming rate, but the government simply printed more currency to pay debts. By 1923, the Republic claimed it could no longer afford the reparations payments required by the Versailles Treaty, and the government defaulted on some payments. In response, French and Belgian troops occupied the Ruhr region, Germany's most productive industrial region at the time, taking control of most mining and manufacturing companies in January 1923. Strikes were called, and passive resistance was encouraged. These strikes lasted 8 months, further damaging the economy and the social life. Citation needed. The strike prevented some goods from being produced, but one industrialist, Hugo Stinnes, was able to create a vast empire out of bankrupt companies. Because the production costs in Germany were falling almost hourly, the prices for German products were unbeatable. Stinnes made sure that he was paid in dollars, which meant that by mid-1923, his industrial empire was worth more than the entire German economy. By the end of the year, over 200 factories were working full-time to produce paper for the spiraling banknote production. Stin's empire collapsed when the government-sponsored inflation was stopped in November 1923. Citation needed. In 1919, one loaf of bread cost 1 mark. By 1923, the same loaf of bread cost 100 billion marks. Citation needed. 1 million mark notes used as notepaper, October 1923. Since striking prevented some goods from being produced, but one industrialist, Hugo Stinnes, was able to create a vast empire out of bankrupt companies. Because the production costs in Germany were falling almost hourly, the prices for German products were unbeatable. Stinnes made sure that he was paid in dollars, which meant that by mid-1923, his industrial empire was worth more than the entire German economy. By the end of the year, over 200 factories were working full-time to produce paper for the spiraling banknote production. Stinnes' empire collapsed when the government-sponsored inflation was stopped in November 1923. Citation needed. In 1919, one loaf of bread cost 1 mark. By 1923, the same loaf of bread cost 100 billion marks. Citation needed. 1 million mark notes used as notepaper, October 1923. Since striking workers were paid benefits by the state, much additional currency was printed, fueling a period of hyperinflation. The 1920s German inflation started when Germany had no goods to trade. The government printed money to deal with the crisis. This meant payments within Germany were made with worthless paper money, and helped formerly great industrialists to pay back their own loans. This also led to pay raises for workers and for businessmen who wanted to profit from it. Circulation of money rocketed, and soon banknotes were being overprinted to 1,000 times their nominal value, and every town produced its own promissory notes. Many banks and industrial firms did the same. Citation needed. The value of the papier mark had declined from 4.2 marks per US dollar in 1914 to 1 million per dollar by August 1923. This led to further criticism of the Republic. On November 15, 1923, a new currency, the Rentenmark, was introduced at the rate of 1 trillion, papier mark for 1 Rentenmark, an action known as redenomination. At that time, 1 US dollar was equal to 4.2 Rentenmark. Reparation payments were resumed, and the Ruhr was returned to Germany under the Locarno Treaties, which defined the borders between Germany, France, and Belgium. Citation needed. Political turmoil. Edit. This section does not cite any sources. Please help improve this section by adding citations to reliable sources. Unsourced material may be challenged and removed. October 2011, learn how and when to remove this template message. 50 million mark banknote issued in 1923, worth approximately 1 US dollar when issued. 9 years earlier, 50 million marks would have been worth approximately 12 million US dollars. Within a few weeks, inflation made the banknote practically worthless. The Republic was soon under attack from both left and right-wing sources. The radical left accused the ruling Social Democrats of having betrayed the ideals of the workers' movement by preventing a communist revolution and sought to overthrow the Republic and do so themselves. Various right-wing sources opposed any democratic system, preferring an authoritarian, autocratic state like the 1871 Empire. To further undermine the Republic's credibility, some right-wingers, especially certain members of the former officer corps, also blamed an alleged conspiracy of socialists and Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I. In the next 5 years, the central government, assured of the support of the Reichswehr, dealt severely with the occasional outbreaks of violence in Germany's large cities. The left claimed that the Social Democrats had betrayed the ideals of the revolution, while the army and the government-financed Free Corps committed hundreds of acts of gratuitous violence against striking workers. The first challenge to the Weimar Republic came when a group of communists and anarchists took over the Bavarian government in Munich and declared the creation of the Bavarian Soviet Republic. The uprising was brutally attacked by Free Corps, which consisted mainly of ex-soldiers dismissed from the army and who were well paid to put down forces of the far left. The Freikorps was an army outside the control of the government, but they were in close contact with their allies in the Reichswehr. On March 13, 1920, 12,000 Freikorps soldiers occupied Berlin and installed Wolfgang Kapp, a right-wing journalist, as Chancellor. Kapp putsch. The national government fled to Stuttgart and called for a general strike against the putsch. The strike meant that no official pronouncements could be published, and with the civil service out on strike, the Kapp government collapsed after only 4 days on March 17. Inspired by the general strikes, a workers' uprising began in the Ruhr region when 50,000 people formed a Red Army and took control of the province. The regular army and the Freikorps ended the uprising on their own authority. The rebels were campaigning for an extension of the plans to nationalize major industries and supported the national government, but the SPD leaders did not want to lend support to the growing USPD, who favored the establishment of a socialist regime. The repression of an uprising of SPD supporters by the reactionary forces in the Freikorps on the instructions of the SPD ministers was to become a major source of conflict within the socialist movement and thus contributed to the weakening of the only group that could have withstood the National Socialist movement. Other rebellions were put down in March 1921 in Saxony and Hamburg. A disabled war veteran reduced to begging, Berlin, 1923. In 1922, Germany signed the Treaty of Rapallo with the Soviet Union, which allowed Germany to train military personnel in exchange for giving Russia military technology. This was against the Treaty of Versailles, which limited Germany to 100,000 soldiers and no conscription, naval forces of 15,000 men, 12 destroyers, 6 battleships, and 6 cruisers, no submarines or aircraft. However, Russia had pulled out of World War I against the Germans as a result of the 1917 Russian Revolution, and was excluded from the League of Nations. Thus, Germany seized the chance to make an ally. Walter Rathenau, the Jewish foreign minister who signed the treaty, was assassinated 2 months later by 2 ultranationalist army officers. Further pressure from the political right came in 1923 with the Beer Hall Putsch, also called the Munich Putsch, staged by the Nazi Party under Adolf Hitler in Munich. In 1920, the German Workers' Party had become the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, or Nazi Party, and would become a driving force in the collapse of Weimar. Hitler named himself as chairman of the party in July 1921. On November 8, 1923, the Kampfbund, in a pact with Erich Ludendorff, took over a meeting by Bavarian Prime Minister Gustav von Kahr at a beer hall in Munich. Ludendorff and Hitler declared that the Weimar government was deposed and that they were planning to take control of Munich the following day. The 3,000 rebels were thwarted by the Bavarian authorities. Hitler was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for high treason, a minimum sentence for the charge. Hitler served less than 8 months in a comfortable cell, receiving a daily stream of visitors before his release on December 20, 1924. While in jail, Hitler dictated Mein Kampf, which laid out his ideas and future policies. Hitler now decided to focus on legal methods of gaining power. Golden Era, 1924, 1929, edit. Gustav Stresemann was Reichskanzler for 100 days in 1923, and served as foreign minister from 1923, 1929, a period of relative stability for the Weimar Republic, known in Germany as Golden Zwanziger, Golden Twenties. Prominent features of this period were a growing economy and a consequent decrease in civil unrest. Once civil stability had been restored, Stresemann began stabilizing the German currency, which promoted confidence in the German economy and helped the recovery that was so ardently needed for the German nation to keep up with their reparation repayments, while at the same time feeding and supplying the nation. Once the economic situation had stabilized, Stresemann could begin putting a permanent currency in place, called the Rentenmark, October 1923, which again contributed to the growing level of international confidence in the German economy. Wilhelm Marx's Christmas broadcast, December 1923. Marx was the longest-serving Chancellor of the Republic. To help Germany meet reparation obligations, the Dawes Plan, 1924, was created. This was an agreement between American banks and the German government in which the American banks lent money to German banks with German assets as collateral to help it pay reparations. The German railways, the National Bank and many industries were therefore mortgaged as securities for the stable currency and the loans 28 shortly after the Locarno treaties were signed. The British, French, and Germans agreed that the borders between their countries would not be changed by force, thus the new borders acted by the Treaty of Versailles were being reinforced by the signing countries, but weakened the 1919 treaty regarding the eastern borders. 28 Germany also agreed to sign arbitration conventions with France and Belgium and arbitration treaties with Poland and Czechoslovakia, undertaking to refer any future disputes to an arbitration tribunal or to the Permanent Court of International Justice. Other foreign achievements were the evacuation of the Ruhr in 1925 and the 1925 Treaty of Berlin, which reinforced the Treaty of Rapallo in 1922 and improved relations between the Soviet Union and Germany. In 1926, Germany was admitted to the League of Nations as a permanent member, improving her international standing and giving her the ability to vote League of Nations legislation. However, this progress was funded by overseas loans, increasing the nation's debts, while overall trade increased and unemployment fell. Stresemann's reforms did not relieve the underlying weaknesses of Weimar but gave the appearance of a stable democracy. The major weakness in constitutional terms was the inherent instability of the coalitions. The growing dependence on American finance was to prove dangerous, and Germany was one of the worst-hit nations in the Wall Street crash of 1929. The Golden Twenties in Berlin, a jazz band plays for a tea dance at the Hotel Esplanade, 1926. The 1920s saw a remarkable cultural renaissance in Germany. During the worst phase of hyperinflation in 1923, the clubs and bars were full of speculators who spent their daily profits so they would not lose the value the following day. Berlin intellectuals responded by condemning the excesses of capitalism, and demanding revolutionary changes on the cultural scenery. Influenced by the brief cultural explosion in the Soviet Union, German literature, cinema, theater, and musical works entered a phase of great creativity. Innovative street theater brought plays to the public, and the cabaret scene and jazz band became very popular. According to the cliché, modern young women were Americanized, wearing makeup, short hair, smoking and breaking with traditional mores. The euphoria surrounding Josephine Baker in the metropolis of Berlin, for instance, where she was declared an erotic goddess and in many ways admired and respected, kindled further ultra-modern sensations in the minds of the German public. 29 Art and a new type of architecture taught at Bauhaus schools reflected the new ideas of the time, with artists such as George Grosz being fined for defaming the military and for blasphemy. Artists in Berlin were influenced by other contemporary progressive cultural movements, such as the Impressionist and Expressionist painters in Paris, as well as the Cubists. Likewise, American progressive architects were admired. Many of the new buildings built during this era followed a straight-lined, geometrical style. Examples of the new architecture include the Bauhaus building by Gropius, Gross's Schauspielhaus, and the Einstein Tower 30. Not everyone, however, was happy with the changes taking place in Weimar culture. Conservatives and reactionaries feared that Germany was betraying her traditional values by adopting popular styles from abroad, particularly those Hollywood was popularizing in American films, while New York became the global capital of fashion. Germany was more susceptible to Americanization, because of the close economic links brought about by the Dawes Plan. In 1929, 3 years after receiving the 1926 Nobel Peace Prize, Stresemann died of a heart attack at age 51. When stocks on the New York Stock Exchange crashed in October, the inevitable knock-on effects on the German economy brought the Golden Twenties to an abrupt end. Social policy under Weimar edit. A wide range of progressive social reforms were carried out during and after the revolutionary period. In 1919, Legislation provided for a maximum working 48-hour workweek, restrictions on night work, a half holiday on Saturday, and a break of 36 hours of continuous rest during the week. 31 That same year, health insurance was extended to wives and daughters without own income, people only partially capable of gainful employment, people employed in private cooperatives, and people employed in public cooperatives. 32 A series of progressive tax reforms were introduced under the auspices of Matthias Erdberger, including increases in taxes on capital. 33 And an increase in the highest income tax rate from 4% to 60%. 34 Under a governmental decree of February 3, 1919, the German government met the demand of the veterans' associations that all aid for the disabled and their dependents be taken over by the central government. 35, thus assuming responsibility for this assistance, and extended into peacetime the nationwide network of state and district welfare bureaus that had been set up during the war to coordinate social services for war widows and orphans. 36. The Imperial Youth Welfare Act of 1922 obliged all municipalities and states to set up youth offices in charge of child protection, and also codified a right to education for all children. 37 While laws were passed to regulate rents and increase protection for tenants in 1922 and 1923. 38 Health insurance coverage was extended to other categories of the population during the existence of the Weimar Republic, including seamen, people employed in the educational and social welfare sectors, and all primary dependents. 32 Various improvements were also made in unemployment benefits, although in June 1920 the maximum amount of unemployment benefit that a family of 4 could receive in Berlin, 90 marks, was well below the minimum cost of subsistence of 304 marks. 39. In 1923, unemployment relief was consolidated into a regular program of assistance following economic problems that year. In 1924, a modern public assistance program was introduced, and in 1925 the accident insurance program was reformed, allowing diseases that were linked to certain kinds of work to become insurable risks. In addition, a national unemployment insurance program was introduced in 1927. 40 Housing construction was also greatly accelerated during the Weimar period, with over 2 million new homes constructed between 1924 and 1931 and a further 195,000 modernized. 41. Decline, 1930, 1933, edit. Onset of the Great Depression, edit. The German Army feeds the poor, Berlin, 1931. In 1929, the onset of the Depression in the United States of America produced a severe shockwave in Germany. The economy was supported by the granting of loans through the Dawes Plan, 1924, and the Young Plan, 1929. When American banks withdrew their loans to German companies, the onset of severe unemployment could not be stopped by conventional economic measures. Unemployment grew rapidly, and in September 1930 a political earthquake shook the republic to its foundations. The Nazi Party, NSDAP, entered the Reichstag with 19% of the popular vote and made the fragile coalition system by which every chancellor had governed unworkable. The last years of the Weimar Republic were stamped by even more political instability than in the previous years. The administrations of Chancellors Brüning, Papen, Schleicher and, from January 30 to March 23, 1933, Hitler governed through presidential decree rather than through parliamentary consultation. Brüning's policy of deflation, 1930, 1932, edit. Gross national product, inflation adjusted, and price index in Deutsches Reich 1926, 1936. The period between 1930 and 1932 is marked by a severe deflation and recession. Unemployment rate in Deutsches Reich between 1928 and 1935. During Brüning's policy of deflation, marked in purple, the unemployment rate soared from 15.7% in 1930 to 30.8% in 1932. On March 29, 1930, after months of lobbying by General Kurt von Schleicher on behalf of the military, the finance expert Heinrich Brüning was appointed as Müller's successor by Reichspräsident Paul von Hindenburg. The new government was expected to lead a political shift towards conservatism. As Brüning had no majority support in the Reichstag, he became, through the use of the emergency powers granted to the Reichspräsident, Article 48, by the Constitution, the first Weimar Chancellor to operate independently of Parliament. This made him dependent on the Reichspräsident, Hindenburg too. After a bill to reform the Reich's finances was opposed by the Reichstag, it was made an emergency decree by Hindenburg. On July 18, as a result of opposition from the SPD, KPD, DNVP, and the small contingent of NSDAP members, the Reichstag again rejected the bill by a slim margin. Immediately afterward, Brüning submitted the president's decree that the Reichstag be dissolved. The consequent general election on September 14 resulted in an enormous political shift within the Reichstag. 18.3% of the vote went to the NSDAP, 5 times the percentage won in 1928. As a result, it was no longer possible to form a pro-Republican majority, not even with a grand coalition that excluded the KPD, DNVP, and NSDAP. This encouraged an escalation in the number of public demonstrations and instances of paramilitary violence organized by the NSDAP. Between 1930 and 1932, Brüning tried to reform the Weimar Republic without a parliamentary majority, governing, when necessary, through the president's emergency decrees. In line with the contemporary economic theory, subsequently termed leave-it-alone liquidationism, he enacted a draconian policy of deflation and drastically cutting state expenditure too. Among other measures, he completely halted all public grants to the obligatory unemployment insurance introduced in 1927, resulting in workers making higher contributions and fewer benefits for the unemployed. Benefits for the sick, invalid and pensioners were also reduced sharply. 42 additional difficulties were caused by the different deflationary policies pursued by Brüning and the Reichsbank, Germany's central bank. 43 In mid-1931, the United Kingdom abandoned the gold standard and about 30 countries, the sterling bloc, devalued their currencies. 44 Making their goods around 20% cheaper than those produced by Germany. As the Young Plan did not allow a devaluation of the Reichsmark, Brüning triggered a deflationary internal devaluation by forcing the economy to reduce prices, rents, salaries and wages by 20%. 6 Debate continues as to whether this policy was without alternative. Some argue that the Allies would not in any circumstances have allowed a devaluation of the Reichsmark, while others point to the Hoover moratorium as a sign that the Allies understood that the situation had changed fundamentally and further German reparation payments were impossible. Brüning expected that the policy of deflation would temporarily worsen the economic situation before it began to improve, quickly increasing the German economy's competitiveness and then restoring its creditworthiness. His long-term view was that deflation would, in any case, be the best way to help the economy. His primary goal was to remove Germany's reparation payments by convincing the Allies that they could no longer be paid. 45 Anton Erkelenz, chairman of the German Democratic Party and a contemporary critic of Brüning, famously said that the policy of deflation is a rightful attempt to release Germany from the grip of reparation payments, but in reality it meant nothing else than committing suicide because of fearing death. The deflation policy causes much more damage than the reparation payments of 20 years. Fighting against Hitler is fighting against deflation, the enormous destruction of production factors. 46. In 1933, the American economist Irving Fisher developed the theory of debt deflation. He explained that a deflation causes a decline of profits, asset prices, and a still greater decline in the net worth of businesses. Even healthy companies, therefore, may appear over-indebted and facing bankruptcy. 47 The consensus today is that Brüning's policies exacerbated the German economic crisis and the population's growing frustration with democracy, contributing enormously to the increase in support for Hitler's NSDAP too. Most German capitalists and landowners originally supported the conservative experiment more from the belief that conservatives would best serve their interests rather than any particular liking for Brüning. As more of the working and middle classes turned against Brüning, however, more of the capitalists and landowners declared themselves in favor of his opponents Hitler and Hugenberg. By late 1931, the conservative movement was dead and Hindenburg and the Reichswehr had begun to contemplate dropping Brüning in favor of accommodating Hugenberg and Hitler. Although Hindenburg disliked Hugenberg and despised Hitler, he was no less a supporter of the sort of anti-democratic counter-revolution that the DNVP and NSDAP represented. 48 In April 1932, Brüning had actively supported Hindenburg's successful campaign against Hitler for re-election as Reichspräsident. 49 5 weeks later, on May 20, 1932, he had lost Hindenburg's support and duly resigned as Reichskanzler. The Papen Deal edit. Nazi Party, NSDAP, leader Adolf Hitler saluting members of the Sturmabteilung in Brunswick, Lower Saxony, 1932. Communist Party, KPD, leader Ernst Thälmann, person in foreground with raised clenched fist, and members of the Rote Front Kampfverbund, RFB, marching through Berlin. Wedding, 1927. Hindenburg then appointed Franz von Papen as new Reichskanzler. Papen lifted the ban on the NSDAP's SA paramilitary, imposed after the street riots, in an unsuccessful attempt to secure the backing of Hitler. Citation needed. Papen was closely associated with the industrialist and land-owning classes and pursued an extreme conservative policy along Hindenburg's lines. He appointed as Reichswehr Minister Kurt von Schleicher, and all the members of the new cabinet were of the same political opinion as Hindenburg. This government was expected to assure itself of the cooperation of Hitler. Since the Republicans were not yet ready to take action, the Communists did not want to support the Republic, and the Conservatives had shot their political bolt. Hitler and Hugenberg were certain to achieve power. Citation needed. Elections of July 1932 edit. Because most parties opposed the new government, Papen had the Reichstag dissolved and called for new elections. The general elections on July 31, 1932 yielded major gains for the Communists, and for the Nazis, who won 37.3% of the vote, their high water mark in a free election. The Nazi Party then supplanted the Social Democrats as the largest party in the Reichstag, although it did not gain a majority. The immediate question was what part the now large Nazi Party would play in the government of the country. The party owed its huge increase to growing support from middle-class people, whose traditional parties were swallowed up by the Nazi Party. The millions of radical adherents at first forced the party towards the left. They wanted a renewed Germany and a new organization of German society. The left of the Nazi Party strove desperately against any drift into the train of such capitalist and feudal reactionaries. Therefore, Hitler refused ministry under Papen, and demanded the chancellorship for himself, but was rejected by Hindenburg on August 13, 1932. There was still no majority in the Reichstag for any government. As a result, the Reichstag was dissolved and elections took place once more in the hope that a stable majority would result. Schleicher Cabinet edit. The November 6, 1932 elections yielded 33.1% for the Nazis, 52 million voters fewer than in the previous election. Franz von Papen stepped down and was succeeded as Chancellor, Reichskanzler, by General Kurt von Schleicher on December 3. Schleicher, a retired army officer, had developed in an atmosphere of semi-obscurity and intrigue that encompassed the Republican military policy. He had for years been in the camp of those supporting the conservative counter-revolution. Schleicher's bold and unsuccessful plan was to build a majority in the Reichstag by uniting the trade unionist left wings of the various parties, including that of the Nazis led by Gregor Strasser. This policy did not prove successful either. Poster for the nationalist black, white, red coalition of Alfred Hugenberg, DNVP leader, Franz von Papen and Franz Selt. In this brief presidential dictatorship intermission, Schleicher assumed the role of socialist general and entered into relations with the Christian trade unions, the left-wing members of the Nazi Party, and even with the Social Democrats. Schleicher planned for a sort of labor government under his generalship. But the Reichswehr officers were not prepared for this. The working class had a natural distrust of their future allies, and the great capitalists and landowners also did not like the plans. Hitler learned from Papen that the general had not received from Hindenburg the authority to abolish the Reichstag parliament, whereas any majority of seats did. The cabinet, under a previous interpretation of Article 48, ruled without a sitting Reichstag, which could vote only for its own dissolution. Hitler also learned that all past crippling Nazi debts were to be relieved by German big business. On January 22, Hitler's efforts to persuade Oskar von Hindenburg, the president's son and confidant, included threats to bring criminal charges over estate taxation irregularities at the president's Neudeck estate, although 5,000 acres, 20 km2, extra were soon allotted to Hindenburg's property. Outmaneuvered by Papen and Hitler on plans for the new cabinet, and having lost Hindenburg's confidence, Schleicher asked for new elections. On January 28, Papen described Hitler to Paul von Hindenburg as only a minority part of an alternative, Papen-arranged government. The four great political movements, the SPD, Communists, Center, and the Nazis were in opposition. On January 29, Hitler and Papen thwarted a last-minute threat of an officially sanctioned Reichswehr takeover, and on January 30, 1933 Hindenburg accepted the new Papen nationalist Hitler coalition, with the Nazis holding only 3 of 11 cabinet seats, Hitler as Chancellor, Wilhelm Frick as Minister of the Interior and Hermann Göring as Minister without portfolio. Later that day, the first cabinet meeting was attended by only 2 political parties, representing a minority in the Reichstag, the Nazis and the German National People's Party, DNVP, led by Alfred Hugenberg, with 196 and 52 seats respectively. Eyeing the Catholic Center Party's 70, plus 20 BVP, seats, Hitler refused their leaders' demands for constitutional concessions, amounting to protection, and planned for dissolution of the Reichstag. Hindenburg, despite his misgivings about the Nazis' goals and about Hitler as a personality, reluctantly agreed to Papen's theory that, with Nazi popular support on the wane, Hitler could now be controlled as Chancellor. This date, dubbed by the Nazis as the Machtergreifung, seizure of power, is commonly seen as the beginning of Nazi Germany. End edit. Hitler's Chancellorship, 1933, edit. Hitler was sworn in as Chancellor on the morning of January 30, 1933 in what some observers later described as a brief and indifferent ceremony. By early February, a mere week after Hitler's assumption of the Chancellorship, the government had begun to clamp down on the opposition. Meetings of the left-wing parties were banned and even some of the moderate parties found their members threatened and assaulted. Measures with an appearance of legality suppressed the Communist Party in mid-February and included the plainly illegal arrests of Reichstag deputies. The Reichstag fire on February 27 was blamed by Hitler's government on the Communists. Hitler used the ensuing state of emergency to obtain the presidential assent of Hindenburg to issue the Reichstag fire decree the following day. The decree invoked Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution and indefinitely suspended a number of constitutional protections of civil liberties, allowing the Nazi government to take swift action against political meetings, arresting and killing the communists. Hitler and the Nazis exploited the German state's broadcasting and aviation facilities in a massive attempt to sway the electorate, but this election yielded a scant majority of 16 seats for the coalition. At the Reichstag elections, which took place on March 5, 1933, the NSDAP obtained 17 million votes. The Communist, Social Democrat, and Catholic Center votes stood firm. This was the last multi-party election of the Weimar Republic and the last multi-party all-German election for 57 years. Hitler addressed disparate interest groups, stressing the necessity for a definitive solution to the perpetual instability of the Weimar Republic. He now blamed Germany's problems on the Communists, even threatening their lives on March 3. Former Chancellor Heinrich Brüning proclaimed that his Center Party would resist any constitutional change and appealed to the president for an investigation of the Reichstag fire. Hitler's successful plan was to induce what remained of the now communist-depleted Reichstag to grant him, and the government, the authority to issue decrees with the force of law. The hitherto presidential dictatorship hereby was to give itself a new legal form. On March 15, the first cabinet meeting was attended by the 2 coalition parties, representing a minority in the Reichstag, the Nazis and the DNVP led by Alfred Hugenberg, 288 plus 52 seats. According to the Nuremberg trials, this cabinet meeting's first order of business was how at last to achieve the complete counter-revolution by means of the constitutionally allowed Enabling Act, requiring a 66% parliamentary majority. This act would, and did, lead Hitler and the Endstab toward his goal of unfettered dictatorial powers. 51. Hitler Cabinet Meeting in mid-March. Edit. At the cabinet meeting on March 15, Hitler introduced the Enabling Act, which would have authorized the cabinet to enact legislation without the approval of the Reichstag. Meanwhile, the only remaining question for the Nazis was whether the Catholic Center Party, Zentrum, would support the Enabling Act in the Reichstag, thereby providing the two-thirds majority required to ratify a law that amended the constitution. Hitler expressed his confidence to win over the Center's votes. Hitler is recorded at the Nuremberg trials as being sure of eventual Center Party Germany capitulation and thus rejecting of the DNVP suggestions to balance the majority through further arrests, this time of Social Democrats. Hitler, however, assured his coalition partners that arrests would resume after the elections and, in fact, some 26 SPD Social Democrats were physically removed. After meeting with Center leader Monsignor Ludwig Koss and other Center trade union leaders daily and denying them a substantial participation in the government, negotiation succeeded in respect of guarantees towards Catholic civil servants and education issues. At the last internal Center meeting prior to the debate on the Enabling Act, Koss expressed no preference or suggestion on the vote, but as a way of mollifying opposition by Center members to the granting of further powers to Hitler, Koss somehow arranged for a letter of constitutional guarantee from Hitler himself prior to his voting with the Center and Bloc in favor of the Enabling Act. This guarantee was not ultimately given. Koss, the party's chairman since 1928, had strong connections to the Vatican Secretary of State, later Pope Pius XII. In return for pledging his support for the act, Koss would use his connections with the Vatican to set in train and draft the Holy See's long-desired Reichskonkordat with Germany, only possible with the cooperation of the Nazis. Ludwig Koss is considered along with Papen as being one of the two most important political figures in the creation of a National Socialist dictatorship. 52. Enabling Act negotiations. Edit. On March 20, negotiation began between Hitler and Frick on one side and the Catholic Center Party, Zentrum, leaders Koss, Steigerwald, and Hackelsberger on the other. The aim was to settle on conditions under which Center would vote in favor of the Enabling Act. Because of the Nazis' narrow majority in the Reichstag, Center's support was necessary to receive the required two-thirds majority vote. On March 22, the negotiations concluded. Hitler promised to continue the existence of the German states, agreed not to use the new grant of power to change the constitution, and promised to retain Zentrum members in the civil service. Hitler also pledged to protect the Catholic confessional schools and to respect the concordats signed between the Holy See and Bavaria, 1924, Prussia, 1929, and Baden, 1931. Hitler also agreed to mention these promises in his speech to the Reichstag before the vote on the Enabling Act. The ceremonial opening of the Reichstag on March 21 was held at the Garrison Church in Potsdam, a shrine of Prussianism, in the presence of many Junker landowners and representatives of the imperial military caste. This impressive and often emotional spectacle orchestrated by Joseph Goebbels aimed to link Hitler's government with Germany's imperial past and portray National Socialism as a guarantor of the nation's future. The ceremony helped convince the old guard Prussian military elite of Hitler's homage to their long tradition and, in turn, produced the relatively convincing view that Hitler's government had the support of Germany's traditional protector, the army. Such support would publicly signal a return to conservatism to curb the problems affecting the Weimar Republic, and that stability might be at hand. In a cynical and politically adroit move, Hitler bowed in apparently respectful humility before President and Field Marshal Hindenburg. Passage of the Enabling Act. Edit. The Reichstag convened on March 23, 1933, and in the midday opening, Hitler made a historic speech, appearing outwardly calm and conciliatory. Hitler presented an appealing prospect of respect towards Christianity by paying tribute to the Christian faiths as essential elements for safeguarding the soul of the German people. He promised to respect their rights and declared his government's ambition is a peaceful accord between church and state, and that he hoped to improve our friendly relations with the Holy See. This speech aimed especially at the future recognition by the named Holy See and therefore to the votes of the Centre Party, addressing many concerns Koss had voiced during the previous talks. Koss is considered to have had a hand therefore in the drafting of the speech. 52 Koss is also reported as voicing the Holy See's desire for Hitler as bulwark against atheistic Russian nihilism previously as early as May 1932. 53. Hitler promised that the act did not threaten the existence of either the Reichstag or the Reichsrat, that the authority of the president remained untouched and that the Länder would not be abolished. During an adjournment, the other parties, notably the Centre, met to discuss their intentions. 54. In the debate prior to the vote on the Enabling Act, Hitler orchestrated the full political menace of his paramilitary forces like the Storm Division in the streets to intimidate reluctant Reichstag deputies into approving the Enabling Act. The Communists' 81 seats had been empty since the Reichstag fire decree and other lesser-known procedural measures, thus excluding their anticipated no votes from the balloting. Otto Wels, the leader of the Social Democrats, whose seats were similarly depleted from 120 to below 100, was the only speaker to defend democracy, and in a futile but brave effort to deny Hitler the two-thirds majority, he made a speech critical of the abandonment of democracy to dictatorship. At this, Hitler could no longer restrain his wrath. 55. In his retort to Wels, Hitler abandoned earlier pretense at calm statesmanship and delivered a characteristic screaming diatribe, promising to exterminate all communists in Germany and threatening Wels' Social Democrats as well. He did not even want their support for the bill. Germany will become free, but not through you, he shouted. 56. Meanwhile, Hitler's promised written guarantee to Monsignor Koss was being typed up, it was asserted to Koss, and thereby Koss was persuaded to silently deliver the Centre Bloc's votes for the Enabling Act anyway. The act, formally titled the Act for the Removal of Distress from People and Reich, was passed by a vote of 441 to 94. Only the SPD had voted against the act. Every other member of the Reichstag, whether from the largest or the smallest party, voted in favor of the act. It went into effect the following day, March 24. Consequences. Edit. Main article, Nazi Germany. The passage of the Enabling Act of 1933 is widely considered to mark the end of the Weimar Republic and the beginning of the Nazi era. It empowered the cabinet to legislate without the approval of Reichstag or the president, and to enact laws that were contrary to the constitution. Before the March 1933 elections, Hitler had persuaded Hindenburg to promulgate the Reichstag fire decree using Article 48, which empowered the government to restrict the rights of habeas corpus, freedom of the press, the freedom to organize and assemble, the privacy of postal, telegraphic and telephonic communications, and legalized search warrants and confiscation beyond legal limits otherwise prescribed. This was intended to forestall any action against the government by the communists. Hitler used the provisions of the Enabling Act to preempt possible opposition to his dictatorship from other sources, in which he was mostly successful. The process of bringing all major organizations into line with Nazi principles and into the service of the state was called Gleichschaltung. Gleichschaltung is usually translated as coordination, but sometimes as forcible coordination. 57 It is a compound word, consisting of gleich, meaning alike, and Schaltung, which means switching. The Enstab meant to imply a particular mechanical meaning of the word, a certain means of wiring an electrical generator and electric motors, so that when the generator is made to turn at a given speed or turn to a certain angle, each motor connected to it will also turn at that speed, or to the same angle. In other words, synchronization. Citation needed. The Enstab was thought of as the generator, and other civil groups as motors wired to it. Citation needed. Hitler's cabinet issued many decrees for the purpose of Gleichschaltung in the weeks following the passage of the act. It removed Jews from the civil service, at Hindenburg's request, an exception was made for Jews who had served at the front during World War I. It banned all trade unions and eventually outlawed all other political parties. After the exiled SPD published its new weekly Neuer Vorwärts in Prague, Hitler banned the party, confiscating its assets and abolishing its parliamentary representation, by decree of June 22. However, opposition was frequently not addressed by legislation at all. The process of Gleichschaltung was often voluntary, or in any event not mandated by a formal decree. Most other parties had dissolved before being officially banned. The Nazi Party's coalition partner, the DNVP, was dissolved on June 27, one day after Hugenberg's resignation from the cabinet. The Staatspartei, formerly the DDP, dissolved itself on June 28, and the DVP on June 29. On 4-5 July, the Catholic parties, the BVP and the Centre, were also wound up. By the time the formal decree banned the creation of new parties, there were none left except the Nazis 58-59. Many organizations showed themselves only too willing to anticipate the Gleichschaltung process and to coordinate themselves in accordance with the expectations of the new era. By the autumn, the Nazi dictatorship had been enormously strengthened. What is striking is not how much, but how little, Hitler needed to do to bring this about. Hitler took remarkably few initiatives. 60. Willing Gleichschaltung was termed Selbstgleichschaltung or self-coordination. There was a rush to join the NSDAP, overrunning the party's ability to process applications. On May 1, the party announced that it was suspending the admission of new members. The party's membership had increased to 2.5 million, from about 900,000 at the end of January. Many prominent intellectuals allied themselves with the new government. The country's most famous philosopher, Martin Heidegger, and its most prominent constitutional scholar, Carl Schmitt, spoke in favor of it, and Heidegger became the sponsor of a manifesto of German professors pledging allegiance to Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist state. Lists were prepared of writers whose works were unacceptable in the new order, including Freud, Einstein, and Brecht. On the evening of May 10, under the leadership of the German Students' Association and without substantial protest by the university faculty, citation needed some 20,000 volumes were burned at Berlin's Opernplatz 61. The Reichswehr had, however, remained mostly untouched by Gleichschaltung. It was not until Hindenburg's death in August 1934 that all military personnel swore an oath of loyalty directly to Hitler, instead of to the Constitution. Thereafter, the military came under gradually increasing pressure to align itself with NSDAP ideology, but it never entirely capitulated. Likewise, the holdings of industrialists and aristocratic junker landowners remained for the most part untouched, whilst the administrative and judicial machinery was only very slightly tampered with. 48 The Nazi efforts to coordinate the Christian churches, both Roman Catholic and Protestant, were mostly unsuccessful, and were largely abandoned. However, the churches as a whole did not present any serious opposition to Hitler. Aftermath. Edit. The Constitution of 1919 was never formally repealed, but the Enabling Act meant that it was a dead letter. The Enabling Act itself was breached by Hitler on 3 occasions in 1934. Article 2 of the Act stated that laws enacted by the government of the Reich may deviate from the Constitution as long as they do not affect the institutions of the Reichstag and the Reichsrat. The rights of the President remain undisturbed. The powers of the Länder, states, were transferred to the central government, rendering the Reichsrat obsolete. A month later, the Reichsrat itself was dissolved. President von Hindenburg died in August, and Hitler appropriated the president's powers for himself. The Enabling Act did not specify any recourse that could be taken if the Chancellor violated Article 2, and no judicial challenge ensued. Following the death of Hindenburg in 1934, the Constitution was largely forgotten, with some minor exceptions. In the political testament of Adolf Hitler, written shortly before his suicide, he appointed Admiral Karl Doenitz to succeed him, but as president rather than Führer. thereby re-establishing a constitutional office dormant since Hindenburg's death 12 years earlier. On April 30, 1945, Doenitz formed what became known as the Flensburg government, which de facto controlled only a tiny area of Germany near the Danish border and the town of Flensburg. It was dissolved by the Allies on May 23. On June 5, the Allied Berlin Declaration stated in its preamble that the Allies assumed supreme authority with respect to Germany, including all the powers possessed by the German government, and any state, municipal, or local government or authority. It also declared that there was no central government or authority in Germany capable of accepting responsibility for the maintenance of order, the administration of the country and compliance with the requirements of the victorious powers. Article 13 of the Declaration read: The Allied governments will take such steps, including the complete disarmament and demilitarization of Germany, as they deem requisite for future peace and security. The Allied representatives will impose on Germany additional political, administrative, economic, financial, military, and other requirements arising from the complete defeat of Germany. All German authorities and the German people shall carry out unconditionally the requirements of the Allied representatives, and shall fully comply with all such proclamations, orders, ordinances, and instructions. These provisions, not legally challenged by either of the subsequent German governments, meant that neither any Einstab decree nor the 1919 Constitution held any legal force over the Allies' administration of Germany. The 1949 Constitution of East Germany, officially, the German Democratic Republic, contained many passages that were originally part of the 1919 Constitution 62. It was intended to be the constitution of a united Germany and was thus a compromise between liberal democratic and Leninist ideologies. It was replaced by a new, explicitly Leninist constitution in 1968, which was substantially amended in 1974. In 1990, the GDR was dissolved and incorporated into West Germany. The Basic Law of the Federal Republic of Germany of West Germany, officially, the Federal Republic of Germany, enacted in 1949, stated: the provisions of Articles 136, 137, 138, 139 and 141 of the German Constitution of August 11, 1919 shall be an integral part of this Basic Law 63. These articles of the Weimar Constitution, which dealt with the state's relationship to various Christian churches, remain part of the German Basic Law. Reasons for failure. Edit. The reasons for the Weimar Republic's collapse are the subject of continuing debate. It may have been doomed from the beginning, since even moderates disliked it and extremists on both the left and right loathed it, a situation often referred to as a democracy without democrats. 64 Germany had limited democratic traditions, and Weimar democracy was widely seen as chaotic. Since Weimar politicians had been blamed for the Dolchstoßlegende, stab in the back myth, a widely believed theory that Germany's surrender in World War I had been the unnecessary act of traitors, the popular legitimacy of the government was on shaky ground. As normal parliamentary lawmaking broke down and was replaced around 1930 by a series of emergency decrees, the decreasing popular legitimacy of the government further drove voters to extremist parties. No single reason can explain the failure of the Weimar Republic. The most commonly asserted causes can be grouped into three categories: economic problems, institutional problems, and the roles of specific individuals. Economic problems. Edit. Main articles: Great Depression in Central Europe, Das Plan, and Reichsbank. The Weimar Republic had some of the most serious economic problems ever experienced by any Western democracy in history. Rampant hyperinflation, massive unemployment, and a large drop in living standards were primary factors. From 1923 to 1929, there was a short period of economic recovery, but the Great Depression of the 1930s led to a worldwide recession. Germany was particularly affected because it depended heavily on American loans. In 1926, about 2 million Germans were unemployed, which rose to around 6 million in 1932. Many blamed the Weimar Republic. That was made apparent when political parties on both right and left wanting to disband the Republic altogether made any democratic majority in parliament impossible. The Weimar Republic was severely affected by the Great Depression. The economic stagnation led to increased demands on Germany to repay the debts owed to the United States. As the Weimar Republic was very fragile in all its existence, the Depression was devastating, and played a major role in the Endstaaps takeover. Most Germans thought the Treaty of Versailles was a punishing and degrading document because it forced them to surrender resource-rich areas and pay massive amounts of compensation. The punitive reparations caused consternation and resentment, but the actual economic damage resulting from the Treaty of Versailles is difficult to determine. While the official reparations were considerable, Germany ended up paying only a fraction of them. However, the reparations damaged Germany's economy by discouraging market loans, which forced the Weimar government to finance its deficit by printing more currency, causing rampant hyperinflation. In addition, the rapid disintegration of Germany in 1919 by the return of a disillusioned army, the rapid change from possible victory in 1918 to defeat in 1919, and the political chaos may have caused a psychological imprint on Germans that could lead to extreme nationalism, later epitomized and exploited by Hitler. Most historians who agree that many industrial leaders identified the Weimar Republic with labor unions and the Social Democrats, who had established the Versailles Concessions. Although some saw Hitler as a means to abolish the latter, the Republic was already unstable before any industry leaders were supporting Hitler. Even those who supported Hitler's appointment often did not support all of Nazism and considered Hitler a temporary solution in their efforts to abolish the Republic. Citation needed industry support alone cannot explain Hitler's enthusiastic support by large segments of the population, including many workers who had turned away from the left. Princeton historian Harold James argues that there was a clear link between economic decline and people turning to extremist politics. 65. Institutional problems. Edit. It is widely believed that the 1919 Constitution had several weaknesses, making the eventual establishment of a dictatorship likely, but it is unknown whether a different constitution could have prevented the rise of the Nazi Party. However, the 1949 West German Constitution, the basic law of the Federal Republic of Germany, is generally viewed as a strong response to these flaws. The institution of the Reichspräsident was frequently considered as an Ersatzkaiser, substitute emperor, an attempt to replace the emperors with a similarly strong institution meant to diminish party politics. Article 48 of the Constitution gave the President power to take all necessary steps if public order and security are seriously disturbed or endangered. Although it was intended as an emergency clause, it was often used before 1933 to issue decrees without the support of Parliament, see above, and also made Gleichschaltung easier. During the Weimar Republic, it was accepted that a law did not have to conform to the Constitution as long as it had the support of two-thirds of Parliament, the same majority needed to change the Constitution, Verfassungsdurchbrechende Gesetze. That was a precedent for the Enabling Act of 1933. The Basic Law of 1949 requires an explicit change of the wording, and it prohibits abolishing the basic rights or the federal structure of the Republic. The use of a proportional representation without a large thresholds meant a party with a small amount of support could gain entry into the Reichstag. That led to many small parties, some extremist, building political bases within the system. To counter the problem, the modern German Bundestag introduced a 5% threshold limit for a party to gain parliamentary representation. However, the Reichstag of the monarchy was fractioned to a similar degree even if it was elected by majority vote, under a two-round system. The Republic fell not by the small parties but by the strength of the Communists, Conservatives, and ultimately the National Socialists. The Reichstag could remove the Reichskanzler from office even if it was unable to agree on a successor. The use of such a motion of no confidence meant that since 1932, that a government could not be held in office when the parliament came together. As a result, the 1949 Grundgesetz stipulates that a chancellor may not be removed by parliament unless a successor is elected at the same time, known as a constructive vote of no confidence. The political parties started to have a role in creating a government only in October 1918. They had a massive inexperience. Role of individuals. Edit. Bruning's economic policy from 1930 to 1932 has been the subject of much debate. It caused many Germans to identify the Republic with cuts in social spending and extremely liberal economics. Whether there were alternatives to this policy during the Great Depression is an open question. Paul von Hindenburg became Reichspräsident in 1925. As he was an old-style monarchist conservative, he had little love lost for the Republic, but for the most part, he formally acted within the bounds of the Constitution. However, he ultimately, on the advice of his son and others close to him, appointed Hitler Chancellor, thereby effectively ending the Republic. Constituent States. Edit. Main article, States of the Weimar Republic. Prior to World War I, the constituent states of the German Empire were 22 smaller monarchies, 3 republican city-states and the imperial territory of Alsace-Lorraine. After the territorial losses of the Treaty of Versailles and the German Revolution of 1918-1919, the remaining states continued as republics. The former Ernestine duchies continued briefly as republics before merging to form the state of Thuringia in 1920, except for Saxe-Coburg, which became part of Bavaria. State. Capital. Free States, Freistädten. Anhalt. Dessau. Baden. Karlsruhe. Bavaria, Bayern. Munich. Brunswick, Braunschweig. Braunschweig. Coburg, to Bavaria in 1920. Coburg. Hesse, Hessen. Darmstadt. Lippe. Detmold. Mecklenburg-Schwerin. Schwerin. Mecklenburg-Strelitz. Neustrelitz. Oldenburg. Oldenburg. Prussia, Prussen. Berlin. Saxony, Sachsen. Dresden. Schaumburg-Lippe. Buckeberg. Thuringia, Thuringen, from 1920. Weimar. Waldeck-Pyrmont, to Prussia. Pyrmont joined Prussia in 1921, Waldeck followed in 1929. Arelsen. Württemberg. Stuttgart. Free and Hanseatic cities, Freie und Hansestate. Bremen. Hamburg. Lübeck. States merged to form Thuringia in 1920. Gotha. Gotha. Reuss. Gera. Saxe-Altenburg, Sachsen-Altenburg. Altenburg. Saxe-Meiningen, Sachsen-Meiningen. Meiningen. Saxe-Weimar-Eisenach, Sachsen-Weimar-Eisenach. Weimar. Schwartberg-Rudolstadt. Rudolstadt. Schwartberg-Sondershausen. Sondershausen. These states were gradually de facto abolished under the Nazi regime via the Gleichschaltung process, as the states were largely reorganized into Gau. However, the city-state of Lübeck was formally incorporated into Prussia in 1937 following the Greater Hamburg Act, apparently motivated by Hitler's personal dislike for the city. Most of the remaining states were formally dissolved by the Allies at the end of World War II and ultimately reorganized into the modern states of Germany.